You're listening to Moment of Truth, a weekly challenge from the front lines of faith, as heard on Courageous Christianity with Richard Mendelow, a radio show and podcast about real faith for the real world.
Today, our moment of truth comes from Romans chapter 12, verse 21, which says, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." I began writing about the rebellion of evil against good in 2015, 10 years ago. It was then that God revealed to me the nature of our present struggle. In 2015, I was just back from my last deployment to Afghanistan. 75% of Americans identified as Christian. The national debt was $18.2 trillion. We spent $3.2 trillion on health care. And the teen suicide rate, though tragic, was not yet a national epidemic. Today, only 62% of Americans identify as Christian. That's down 13% in just 10 years. The national debt is $37.85 trillion, almost double from 2015. We're projected to spend almost $5.6 trillion on health care, almost double from 2015. And suicide is the second leading cause of death for 10 to 24-year-olds. The U.S. is one of the wealthiest nations in the world, and yet we have the highest national debt. We spend more on health care than any other nation, and yet we have the worst health. We have made a god of money, believing it will make us happy. We're one of the wealthiest nations on earth, and yet we have one of the highest suicide rates. Sadly, the CDC doesn't correlate the drop in faith in this nation with any negative outcomes, but instead blames everything from economic stress to COVID to firearms to stigmas associated with mental health care to stress on minority and LGBTQ plus groups. And while some of these things are right in my mind, the CDC is ironically blaming the symptoms rather than the disease itself. I attribute these symptoms to the attack on faith and the faithful. I blame the celebration of sin for the fatherlessness, the hopelessness, the sickness, and the lack of virtue which have produced the moral, spiritual, and economic bankruptcy we face today. I say that because in the 6 years of this show, the attack on faith and the celebration of sin have come out into the open fully, undeniably, without shame, and without any rules of engagement. In 2020, local, state, and federal administrations used COVID to close churches and force untested vaccines on people of faith. In that time, the forces of perversity went from pushing sexually explicit LGBTQ books on 5-year-olds to murdering people who think differently from them as though they don't think differently. And I'm referring to the murder of Charlie Kirk and its celebration thereafter. In this time, this past 6 years, the teachers who decades ago said that it was not their responsibility to discipline our children decided it's now their responsibility to unilaterally decide what sex our children should be. In the past 6 years, anti-Semitic mobs began openly attacking Jews on the street, on college campuses, and in synagogues, while attacking the nation of Israel on the world stage in the completely twisted belief that sexual aberration of every description has the right to exist, and fundamentalist Islamic rapists and murderers have the right to exist and even govern nation-states, but Jews and the nation of Israel don't have the right to exist. In this time, men began playing in women's sports and celebrating their victories to the cheers of those who pretend to support women's rights. In this time, women began marching in protests supporting Hamas and other radical Islamic terror groups which behead and rape women, though they deny them education and jobs. In this time, politicians began openly supporting attacks against police, federal officers, and people who support traditional biblical American values, and even celebrating their murder. And most recently, as though that weren't enough, as Christians have been murdered by Islamic terrorists by the thousands in churches and communities in Africa, burned alive, shot and dismembered with machetes, the leftist media has said nothing. These attacks reveal the open struggle between the forces of evil and the forces of good. They show that ordinary people will always be stuck in the middle, some as pawns, some as perpetrators, some too lazy and comfortable to care, and some as agents of change. They also show that God will not fix this world himself because he wants to work through us to fix it. My conclusion is that evil is relentless, and if we want to call ourselves Christians, followers of Jesus Christ, we must also be relentless. Christians can no longer be spectators. If we do nothing, what will the case be in 6 more years from now? We must act, and we must act decisively according to the word of God as written, not becoming like our enemies, but by refusing to become like our enemies. It's about offense and defense, showing God to the world and refusing to be silent. It's about the full armor of God, and it's about courageous Christianity.
This has been your Moment of Truth. To hear the full conversation, visit CourageousChristianity.today/listen or search Courageous Christianity with Richard Mendelow wherever you get your podcasts.